Welcome. Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Hello and welcome!
Welcome. Welcome. Welcome.
Welcome.
Hello and welcome!
Welcome. Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Hello and welcome!
Welcome. Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Hello and welcome.
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 Back now with a disturbing rise during the pandemic. As many people stay home to stay safe, that can be the worst place to be for victims of domestic violence.
1 in 5 homicides in San Diego County last year were the result of domestic violence.
According to the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have experienced domestic violence in their lifetime.
The Minnesota Coalition for Battered Women reports in 2015, 34 people died.
New numbers estimate at least 33 people experience domestic violence every day in Dane County.
Hello, and welcome to the Connections for Abused Women and Their Children's annual fundraiser, Sounds of Silence. I'm Natalie Martinez from NBC5 Chicago. You know, all of us have spent more time around our kitchen tables in this past year. It's become the classroom, the workspace, the entertainment center, and so much more. It's evident that great things happen around a kitchen table. As you've just seen, the problems of domestic violence are incredibly prevalent in our society, but they are not a new phenomenon. Back in 1976, a group of advocates who were deeply concerned about the issue started meeting around a kitchen table to discuss what they could do. Well, tonight, we've brought some of CAWC's visionaries back together around a kitchen table to talk about those initial conversations and the issues and challenges that the movement faced that ultimately led to the formation of Greenhouse Shelter and CAWC. Here are Barbara Engel, previous CAWC board member, Ori Pennick, previous CAWC executive director, Dr. David Levine, who's been an ally and champion in this movement for more than 2 decades, and Stephanie Love Patterson, CAWC's longtime executive director.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us for our kitchen table conversation about CAWC. I remember the start of the 70s, there were very few resources available for victims and survivors of domestic violence. And it was really hard to keep folks safe. And so I'm really happy that you all are here to kind of talk about from your perspective what it was like, because I know there's some great stories.
The whole reason for opening Greenhouse was that there was no place for battered women and their families to go. And many of them were going to, I believe it was Salvation Armies overnight, but they weren't getting any services. They weren't getting any counseling, and we were aware of it. There were groups like the YWCA and others who were doing counseling, but in terms of the security and the safety, there was none of it. Mm-hmm. And the wisdom of some women said, we got to do more. In fact, it was around a coffee table where they were having discussions about what do we do, how do we do it, how do we acknowledge it? Because there were many people who denied that it was even an issue. A friend of mine said, you know, I think they want to open a shelter. As I looked into it more and got people to talk to me more, I said, oh, now I know the why. The question is the where. And then that all kind of came together.
I was a survivor of sexual assault and molestation, and when that happened, there was nothing. And I want to set the stage. This was pre-internet. There was never a rape crisis center or a battered women's shelter thought about. And it's not so long ago. I'm not that old. But, you know, it was When people talk about a conspiracy of silence, you have no idea. There were no made-for-TV movies on this. Oprah wasn't talking about it. Really, nobody did. What happened is we had these consciousness-raising groups, and people started talking about the molestation, the battering, the sexual assault. And it was out of some of that, I thought, we need to have a rape crisis center. And the Y was doing that. And that's what ended up happening. I was at the Y, I was director of their new program, and we were waiting for rape victims to call. And again and again and again, women would call up and say, they wouldn't say I was just attacked, or I was raped. They'd say, I think my husband is going to kill me. Yes. He tried to choke me last night, and you hear the kids in the background screaming. And she says, I think he's going to kill me. And we had nowhere to send her. And you could hear the terror. And then people, my predecessor, Susan Schechter, was one of the people who started the original CAWC, Chicago Abused Women Coalition. Yes. And it was the coalition of people who came forward and said, we have to do something.
Yeah, and just moving a little, later, even into the 80s, I'm a physician, and sexual assault, domestic violence was not even mentioned, talked about, thought about at all. So from a medical response, there was, no guidance at all. I kept on, sort of asking, like, isn't there something we can do? And even with a progressive, administration, med school was very rigid, and they had a little bit of a mention in our public health course, but nothing even serious acknowledging this without ever asking the question about what was going on at home, how someone was feeling. And then this, luckily later I went to a progressive residency program that was ahead of the game and actually was part of the early screening, but it was like groundbreaking to start screening in emergency departments, and this is back now even getting into the early 90s.
Domestic violence and sexual assault was really invisible, and that you could go into a social service place or a police station or a hospital filled with bruises and, unexplained kind of, bruises that don't match the story. I fell down the stairs, but wow, this looks like a, punch in the eye, and that no one thought to ask a question. Who did this to you? How did this happen?
When I look at the criminal justice system, I called it the criminal injustice system, because the injustice being done legally was beyond approach. And again, there was no media on it. There was nobody we could talk to. Even some of the women's magazines, Essence and all, who came in, First Shelter for Battered Women, they wanted to interview, which we wouldn't permit necessarily, interview people, women who had been abused, but never the structure. Yeah. And not talking about the structure doesn't save the problem as much as it's important to hear individual cases. If you don't want to recognize the structure that permits it, it continues.
We've made progress, a lot of progress, but there is so much to do, and like a lot of times where I've witnessed screenings, or people are still being screened in front of their partners at times. They're not being separated out. Or another huge structural issue is if English is not the primary language, either people skip screening if it's too hard to find a translation service, or the community was, especially the interpreter services, a lot of the interpreters lived in the community and knew a lot of the family of the patients. So using a translator to do screening, the risk of that getting back to the abuser was incredibly high.
Part of the problem is, how do we define masculinity where dominance and aggression and power over in a very cruel way is the way we've defined it. And so that's what we've glorified, that's what we ask young men to live up to. That's the problem. So I think we need to look at, how do we educate, kids, young men and young women, and hold them responsible and accountable for looking at the issue of violence and trying to figure out how to end it. We glorify violence, and we really believe that it's critically necessary, and you look globally and that's true. And deep in the center of that is where the problem is.
From my perspective, I think in the 70s and 80s, there was so much work to just draw attention to the issue, just as we started out, that we kind of left out the part about the prevention and about, working with males and helping them to understand and helping society to understand. There's two pieces to this. There's the person that's being harmed and there's the person that's causing harm, and what do we do? And so I think our sort of responsibility moving forward is to maybe come back to the kitchen table and talk more about prevention and education. I mean, it amazes me that in 2021, people still say, oh my God, what did you do? What did you do to make your partner hit you? What did you, oh my God, you should just leave. And
why don't you simply leave?
Why don't you just leave? Exactly.
When I think, for innovations for, CAWC, I think one of the biggest ones on top of, Greenhouse is the Hospital Crisis Intervention Program, HCIP. You could say that you were going to the ER for an injury, but you could also say you were going to the hospital to go visit someone or for a clinic visit, and then be able to have a way to come safely to the emergency department where people could get their medical care and actually get their crisis intervention, which could lead to full placement into a shelter, to getting their locks changed, to getting plugged into counseling, was absolutely an amazing intervention at the time. And I think the other big innovation, I think one of the smartest things that we did, besides placing the care right there in a side room, we had a secret exit where people could actually escape out.
So like we were talking a bit about prevention, sometimes people forget about kids. It's like, wow, they just think about the adults and forget that they're little ones that are watching what's going on. And maybe even if they're not present when the abuse is happening, they see the tables turned over and they see mom with the black eye and the police showing up at the door. And so we realize if we want to attack some of the community violence that's going on in the city of Chicago, we have to address and appropriately deal with trauma. So we have family trauma therapists.
What really made the difference and what brought this to public attention was a movement. People who said there's something deep inside of here, and it's not just we need counseling for this woman because somebody is hitting her. But we need to liberate women. We have to have women with the same levels of rights and responsibilities and agency in the world.
I want to thank David, Ori, and Barbara for being with us all tonight, and for all the men and women who worked tirelessly to make CAWC what it is today. Without these pioneers, countless survivors would not have access to life-saving services. We are so incredibly grateful for their ongoing support. It's as true now as it was in 1976. We cannot do this work without incredible donors. Please text CAWC to 20222 to make a $25 donation. And if you haven't already had a chance, purchase raffle tickets. Tonight, I'm thrilled to be introducing our first champion awardee, a woman who has dedicated over 35 years of her life to CAWC and the clients we serve every day. I'm so proud to award Beatrice Burgos with the Champion Award. Beatrice Burgos is more than an advocate. She's a revolutionary, a force of nature, able to influence the path of people's lives. She's fought fearlessly for the rights of victims and for greater access, recognition, and support for survivors. On what is often their worst, most frightening day, thousands of survivors and their children have been met by Bee's warm embrace at Greenhouse Shelter, met by her warmth, her unwavering care, and dedication to their life free from violence. Bee has been a force in the domestic violence advocacy space for decades, and it seems like everyone in this work has a story about Bee. A memory that always comes to mind about my years of working with Bee is the time we helped a woman when there were unimaginable circumstances. She was connected to an abuser who was powerful and influential. She fled 7 different states just to come to Chicago to find safety. Because of Bee's skill and compassion, we were able to change her name so many times that we forgot what her actual name was. She was able to receive much needed medical care for herself and her unborn baby, and then back to Greenhouse Shelter for safety and services and resources. Bee's creativity, quick problem solving, and innovation saved this woman's and her newborn child's life. Bee has made Greenhouse not just a shelter, but a home a place of community, dignity, and family. And I can only imagine all the loving, supportive conversation around Greenhouse Shelter's kitchen table. Our organization would not be what it is today without her.
I used to work as a rape crisis intervention. I've seen many survivors that came there because they were attacked by their partner and they wouldn't say it. So I wanted to find out more. Then I seen an ad in the Reader from CAWC asking for volunteers to help in the shelter. That's the beginning of my tenure with CAWC. There wasn't a lot of information at those times because I came in 1985. They were the beginning of a lot of things happening with survivors. And there's also a lot of fear to leave the security of the home, to leave and change life for their children. And they don't want to go, and they just really push their mother to keep it there because they want to continue to have the life that they have. That is the biggest barrier for many survivors to leave, but they do leave. What motivates me is the drive that survivors have. Even though they lose everything, they want so much more for themselves and for their family. And to look at that, I always felt like I have no choice. I have to co-partner with them and support that journey because it is a very difficult journey for many families. I feel, from the beginning, I felt like the denial of a home, the denial of the support, is a human right violation. It's just not domestic violence. Greenhouse is keeping people safe, is the motto in here, you know. It's a shelter first, it's crisis intervention. First people calling the phone and we have the space, we do the intake, and then we say, yes, you can come, we have the space. The immediate coming in is to have a crisis intervention with them and with their children, introduce them to the entire house, introduce them to other families. We absolutely need a new shelter. I want donors to co-partner with us so we can do the work, so we can provide appropriate services and provide a better, comfortable place for survivors to live. Right now, we are only like, the staff sometimes call me and say another thing broke down. And yesterday, one staff said, we are falling apart. And I told her, no, we're not. We're going to glue it back and we're going to keep it going until we get a new house. That's my eternal hope, you know. The success for me is when a family walks out of Greenhouse with their children to their apartment, their family already begin their healing in a future without violence. I had a remarkable part where a survivor that I worked when I first started, she come back and told me, you don't understand what you did for me. I used to want to be hiding under the mattress, but I was a zombie for many years, she said, but because I lost my soul. And you said to me, the first place you had to fight is in your mind. You have to do it for your kids. So what is going to be? And she said that day is that she went out, get a job, and eventually ended up going to school. And she said now she writes poetry. And she said, I reclaimed my life because someone told me that I can do it.
Thank you, Bea, so much for those wonderful words. And as Bea said, our shelter is well loved. It's also well worn. And I'd like to take you on a mini tour of Greenhouse Shelter. This is the first stop of that important journey where they come into our intake office and they meet wonderful staff like Ronica, who helps to welcome the adults and children into Greenhouse Shelter for the very first time and as much as possible to normalize an experience in a domestic violence shelter. And now here we are in the first floor common area where this space is used for multiple things for residents here at Greenhouse Shelter. One of the neat things, as you'll see, is our TV and our video games and other board games as well as movies so that adults and children are entertained while they're here at their stay at Greenhouse Shelter.
here we are at the hub of Greenhouse Shelter, our kitchen. We provide meals for individuals who are coming to Greenhouse from all over the globe. And now here we are at the kitchen table here at Greenhouse Shelter. At this table, some amazing conversations happen with our residents. We have individuals from so many different cultures and ethnic backgrounds. There's information sharing, resources, and just rich conversation about various cultures. This table, we wish we could have a larger size table to account all of our residents at one time, but our amazing staff do everything that they can to make this space comfortable and inviting for the residents that we serve here at Greenhouse Shelter. And here we are in one of Greenhouse Shelter's 10 bedrooms. And as you can see, there's multiple beds, sometimes for single families, other times families have to share. One of the wonderful things about this space is that sometimes, for the very first time, families get to sleep without worrying about any violence erupting in their household. Our second Champion Award recipient is Dane Jardine from Crestline Hotels and Resorts. At the onset of COVID-19, the CAWC hotline saw a dramatic jump in requests for support. Survivors were forced to shelter in place with their abusers with catastrophic outcomes. At the same time, in order to maintain health requirements, Greenhouse Shelter had to reduce its capacity by 20 beds, severely limiting our ability to meet the increased demand. We needed to come up with a creative solution, and we did. CAWC staff reached out to an industry which was struggling during the pandemic: hotels. Dane supported CAWC with hotel accommodations for our clients and has been on hand for the past 18 months to meet every client's unique needs. Despite having one of the most challenging years in the hospitality's history, Dane could not have been more generous with his time and resources. While a domestic violence shelter is custom built to meet the survivor requirements, a hotel is not. With Dane's support, every survivor had access to safe accommodations when they needed it most, complete with a kitchen table in every room. At CAWC, our mission is to answer every request for support, and during this most challenging year, Dane made that possible. To really understand the impact of Dane's work, let's hear directly from a survivor that was able to access safe housing because of this partnership.
My name is Lucia, and I am a survivor. I remember the day Chicago's stay-at-home order went into place. For so many, home became the sole place of safety and shelter, but for me, it was the opposite. I was now stuck inside with my abuser 24/7. He locked me in our house. He cut off all contact with family and friends. He threatened to hurt my dog and give her away. I had tried to leave a few times before, but my abuser always promised he would change. He never changed. Finally, during quarantine, I knew I needed help. I found CAWC by searching online and called the hotline. I was nervous because of the times I had tried to leave before, but my counselor told me I wasn't alone. Survivors often try to leave many times before they can leave for good. My counselor and I made a plan for leaving. First, my dog Rosie and I needed a safe place to stay. The answer to this, surprisingly, at least to me, was a hotel room. My CAWC counselor got me and Rosie to a comfortable hotel room that even had a kitchen. She then helped me apply for rental assistance, sign a lease for a new apartment, and even get a higher paying job. We were in the hotel for 3 months and then moved to our brand new, safe apartment. I finally felt free. CAWC was the first place that validated my feelings and helped me heal from years of abuse by my now ex-husband. CAWC made me feel like I wasn't alone. I know I have support, and that is all because of CAWC.
I really want to thank our amazing client by honoring us and sharing her story as she stayed in a hotel for safety. And now I'd like to introduce to you Dane Jardine from Homewood Suites, downtown Chicago, as he accepts CAWC's Champion Award. It's been an amazing partnership over the last few years during the pandemic. I remember the day we picked up the phone and called you and said, we need to have a place for our residents to go. Can you tell us a bit about that and how you prepared for victims of domestic violence to stay in your hotel?
Yeah, I do two-stepping. It was you actually that called me. Yes. I remember. But we are, one of the other things that our hotel does very frequently is work with guests who are being relocated, or we work with like housing disaster relocation companies. So our team is pretty well versed in how to handle this delicately and with care, and make sure that everyone knew that when your guests were coming, it's not the typical check-in process. It's not the, again, it's not the trying to find the best restaurant for them and things like that. It's to get people in and get them safe and get them somewhere, somewhere to go lay down.
What did you all have to do, you and your team at the hotel, to prepare to receive CAWC clients?
For us, it was operationally there was just some really kind of back-end things. We put some systems in place to make sure that our team knows who the guests can call, who can call up to the rooms, making sure that no one knows that these people are here, making sure that everything is kept confidential. So we put some processes in place for that. And then also with a lot of our teams overnight, that was a lot of your clients come in the evening, typically after business hours. And we try and be as responsible as we can, but our team in the evening knows the CAWC, even without maybe a phone call from someone, if one of your clients shows up, they know exactly how to handle it.
Can you tell us what you've learned through this partnership with CAWC about domestic violence and how your perspective has changed?
I think the biggest perspective change was that this is pervasive, and it's not one. It doesn't happen to one kind of person. It doesn't happen to only women. It doesn't happen to old people only. It doesn't happen to young people. We've run the gamut of every kind of person, from every kind of background, male, female, with children, without children. We've seen all of them come just through our doors.
Dane, can you tell us what your most profound moment was while working with victims and survivors of domestic violence?
It was in the evening and I got a phone call. We had someone coming and they were coming immediately from the hospital. Excuse me. I had to call, I called my staff and just let them know that someone's gonna be coming to the hotel. We know how to handle things, and we know what our process is for when we let people come in. But I was told that it was going to be visible that they had been hurt, and had to let our team know. I felt it was important that my team knew who was coming, so that they knew what I didn't want anyone to be surprised. I certainly didn't want to make the guests to feel uncomfortable or feel maybe slightly embarrassed. I was like, these people will be coming. This is what's going on. We need to be prepared for it. And it was. I think there was a moment there where I kind of went, this is not just letting people come to the hotel. And that was a big deal.
Congratulations to both of our incredible Champion Award winners. Our winners exemplify that the acts of an individual can have life-changing impact at organizations like CAWC. If you have not had a chance yet, please donate now. Your gift makes it possible for CAWC to answer every single call and ensure every single survivor can access the resources they need to lead a violence-free life. Please get your phone out now. Text CAWC to 20222 to donate $25 or click the button on your screen now. We are thrilled to introduce the present and the future of CAWC. An incredible group of women who have dedicated their lives to the mission of ending domestic violence. Domestic violence is an epidemic in our city, and these women are on the front lines every single day, meeting the needs of those impacted. Last year alone, they were able to provide 932 survivors and their children domestic violence services, including legal support, counseling, and shelter. We hope you are inspired by their stories and that we can count on your support. Around the kitchen table, let's hear from the future leaders of CAWC. Here are Keisha Larkins, Pamela Wilcher, Megan Rosado, Courtney Herrera, and Colleen Montgomery.
I started working at CAWC and started working in domestic violence because I'd always been drawn to just community support and community work. I think my goal has always just been to do work that helps people and helps people that need it. So that was kind of how I got into DV.
And I have a love for helping people. And it's just the compassion that, somebody goes through something and you're able to step in and be like, wait a minute, let's think about this, let's work this out. So the people part for me is like the biggest part.
My background is in psychology. I've always worked in social services in some aspect, and I've liked going to work to help people and encourage people. So DV is naturally about helping and encouraging other people, right, and empowering women.
My line of work has always been working with different populations, experiencing different crises or traumas in that way and helping people through it, and then out to the other side. So that just naturally led me to intersect with clients who experience domestic violence, and then led me to CAWC.
I studied community organizing and have worked with homeless people, people experiencing different issues. When I decided to look for a job, then it was a natural fit.
Megan, you've worked with CAWC the longest. How's the face of survivors changed over that time you've been with the agency?
Today we're working with folks that have multiple experiences with oppression, maybe a lifetime of experiencing trauma and abuse. Trauma means more mental health issues with addiction, issues with immigration.
When people think about domestic violence, or when they ask me about working with survivors, I think the thing that they see most is physical abuse. They don't really see financial abuse or emotional abuse. And it's something that even for survivors coming in, when we're doing psychoeducation with survivors, or we're doing support groups like for survivors who maybe don't identify as a victim, giving that education can help people kind of recognize how abuse may have been present in their lives, even if they didn't realize it.
Yeah, and that ties into the work that we're doing in the hospitals with our hospital crisis intervention project. Is we're working directly with the clients, but then also training the healthcare professionals to recognize and know that these are signs and symptoms of abuse, such as physical, social, mental, financial, that I know you're doing as well at Haymarket and we're doing everywhere. But helping to teach healthcare professionals how to recognize those things is going to help us reach more people and more faces.
That's one of the things that I find most rewarding about my role in the agency is knowing the impact that the trainings that we provide have on creating a more effective community response, more trauma-informed and more effective response to survivors by the skills and the knowledge that we're able to give to service providers, and as well as community members.
At Haymarket, our substance use facility that I work at, the criminal justice is big. So a lot of our clients are in the criminal justice system, dealing with the court systems as well, and Zoom is very frustrating for them.
You may be waiting like 3 hours. Then you get into it, they say the court got switched. And the women get so frustrated. With COVID, things have changed. And we have to keep them on point, whereas don't give up. This was just a temporary setback. We want to keep on this phone. We want to find how to go back into that court and find somebody else if we have to go through a different way.
Homelessness is a big issue with our clients, poverty, and just the shame and guilt that goes, the dual issues, right? So they're dealing with domestic violence and that shame and guilt, but also dealing with substance use. Oftentimes they're relapsing, so they are feeling a lot of shame and guilt with that as well.
I think about 80% of CAWC's clients are below the poverty line. There aren't a lot of resources that are often available for just direct financial support for clients when they need that. And childcare is hard to find for clients.
Affordable health care.
Yes.
And because they need the childcare in order to be able to work. I do know at the shelter, we have children being protectors of the mother. The child becomes their friend. And we have to let the mom know they still need to be able to go play. They still need that time to be a child. And the kids, when they finally start feeling that they're safe, we start seeing them like branch off from the mom.
For kids who grow up where there is violence, it does have a big impact on them. If they're depends on kind of what their age is. If it's a preschooler, you might see them like regress developmentally. They might see like start bedwetting, or you might see that like clinginess or that separation anxiety. Child exposed to DV is more likely to become an adult who is experiencing anxiety or depression.
That's what I see at Haymarket, right? So we do a lot of education on breaking that cycle of abuse so that their children are not in abusive relationships moving forward.
and our parents who have children being fearful that their kids will continue the cycle. And so it's our responsibility to remind them, but you're doing your part to break it. You're here, you can help. You're learning all these new skills and techniques, and they see you doing that, and they're going to model that as they grow up.
I've talked to countless survivors who've told me, I stayed for my children, and when I left, it was for my children, right?
Yeah.
So
that's almost when survivors have a light bulb moment, right? When you say, well, what if your daughter was in this situation? Would you want her to stay in this relationship? And my clients are like, oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
I think just one of the barriers is just how dangerous it is for survivors at the time that they try to leave the relationship. That can be the time where the abuser starts to feel like they're losing that power over that person, and they kind of increase the violence or increase, the abuse. For some people, kind of what goes on in their household is kind of seen as a private thing. It helps when we do have agencies like CAWC where someone can just call and talk to someone.
I think there's not enough accountability for people who are causing the harm. For a survivor to end the relationship, that's a loss. If for their safety, they need to actually go somewhere else, that's a loss of their home, right? For the kids, it's a loss of their school, their peers, sometimes family members, faith community, all of the sacrifices that someone needs to make, and it's really not fair,
Something I've noticed about CAWC is we never turn anybody away. We don't have wait lists for our programs. We're always able to pick up the phone and talk to someone. We have our 24/7 hotline. And just that, being able to connect with people right when they call, right when they reach out for help is huge.
We need more space.
We need a new shelter.
Because we have women that, we might have 4 women that needs attention right away, but we don't have but 2 offices that we can actually go in, and it's not the best for confidentiality.
Space is definitely a challenge, both with shelter beds and also just, office space in general.
Something that it's one of my challenges is to make sure that my staff are taking care of themselves, that I'm taking care of myself. Vicarious trauma, all of our clients are either actively experiencing trauma or have experienced in the past or at risk of experiencing it in the future. It's a lot to take in, especially when you have a really heavy caseload.
Absolutely.
So being mindful of that and open to talking about it and talking about strategies to take care of ourselves.
It just helps to, like we talk about, right, really loving what you do. At the end of the day, that helps so much to just love what you do as well, and see clients planted that seed and see them having those light bulb moments.
It's so inspiring,
It is,
right? To witness the resiliency of the individuals and families.
Absolutely, that energizes you.
Connections for Abused Women and Their Children is so proud to champion the stories that you've heard tonight and all the survivors that we serve. Their strength and resilience inspires the work we do every day.
We are so grateful for the skilled, passionate, and diverse team of counselors, advocates, and staff here at CAWC. Each day, this team welcomes members of our community to the kitchen table here at our shelters and at all our programs to discuss the future they always hoped for and how we can best empower them to achieve it.
I support CAWC because
everyone should be able to live free from violence.
Everyone should have access to the support and resources they need to take charge of their lives.
To end community violence, we need to stop the cycle of domestic violence.
All children deserve to grow up without fear.
For 45 years, CAWC has been supporting survivors of domestic violence and their children to change their lives.
Tonight, we ask for your support. The work CAWC does simply isn't possible without it. Can we count on you to contribute?
It's easy. Just text CAWC to 20222 to donate $25 now or select the button on your screen.
Your gift will allow survivors of domestic violence to access shelter, counseling, legal advocacy, and other resources.
Support children's services, including counseling and art therapy.
Provide housing and enable families to transition from dangerous situations into homes where they will thrive.
Empower survivors to regain control of their lives and achieve their dreams.
Thank you for joining us at the kitchen table tonight. Your support means everything to us. Together, we can create a world free from violence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you.